Follow me on Twitter at Payown, Payowyn, and he's
at Damashe, Damashe.
Hey, bro, let's get into this thing.
It's Damashe and Michael, just talking tech.
And how long have you had it?
Oh, man, 2011 maybe, 2012.
Age is nice. Age is nice.
Yeah, that's another reason because I read his article and I was like, you know what? That makes a lot more sense. Plus, I can stop fighting with this damn database because it's giving me fits.
Well, I'm trying to figure out Empowering the Blind in yourownpay.com because I have empoweringtheblind.com that I've had since 2012. So that's an age domain that if I started using it could help push up articles on yourownpay.com, which I got in 2014.
I've been sort of thinking about a strategy. It sort of relates with domain names in general. Like, one, I sort of have a problem. Thanks, Mike, for introducing me to Namecheap because I never looked at them. And Hover would a lot of times curve my habit of purchasing domain names because I look like, I'm not really finna spend $29 for that. I don't know what I'm going to do with it. Oh, it's on sale for 88 cents. Oh, yeah, that's no problem. That's just $1. Jeez,
Yeah.
I got like 20 domains.
Dollar after I can bees.
Yeah. I got like 20 domains or something. Like, I don't know what the hell I'm going to do next year when it's time to renew all this crap. One thing I've been thinking about, I had this conversation with a good friend of ours, Desiree, about branding and all that sort of stuff. And I was like, well, I know I have an audience in blind people, professional blind people or just super geeky, tinkering blind people that want to learn about how to use some of the apps and some of the workflows and all this type of stuff that I'm doing. But I don't want to come out with a website / business name that sort of paints me into a corner of only dealing with blind people, right? Because I can still provide value to sighted people. One domain that I registered just because I thought it looked cool and I was thinking about, hey, Eyes Free. So eyesfree.solutions is a domain that I registered. Do not go there. It's not going to take you anywhere. It's probably going to give you some random generic page or something. You know what? I'm going to redirect it to Google.
Advertisements for Namecheap.
Actually, I'm going to
redirect it to an affiliate link.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to get out. Yeah, there you go. Buy your own .solutions domain.
There you go.
But she pointed out to me that on first look, and her whole thing is, 5 seconds to impress, and we'll drop a link to her website in the show notes. She's like really big on like that quick first instant impression. People are going to think either if they're familiar with the term eyes free and how it's been generally used in the blind community, that you're only, targeting blind people. If they're not familiar with it, then maybe that opens up the discussion for them to kind of look at your site and be like, oh, he's just mainly focused on keyboard stuff, which is cool keyboard shortcuts. So I scrapped that domain and actually never built that site. But what I've been thinking, which kind of relates to your thing about yourownpay.com versus empoweringtheblind.com, is we both do screencasts, right? And as soon as I figure out a reasonable solution for making this work, so something that's fairly simple, not too complicated, I want to be able to record a screencast and have 2 versions of it, basically, or one version. One version with voiceover in. Now, I don't know. I'm starting to kind of investigate this a little bit to see if maybe I can add the voiceover track as sort of like a subtitle track or alternative language track. And if that could be easily accessed by a blind person, that would give me one file to upload.
Audio description.
Yeah. Try to use that channel for the actual voiceover track so that a person that wants that turns it on. And if you're not a voiceover user, you don't have to deal with the screen reader chattering and only have to produce one file, right? I can upload one file to YouTube or Vimeo, whatever. The other alternative I thought about was if I can't do it that way and I have to release basically 2 different videos that are the same, one with voiceover in, one with voiceover out, why not use that Eyes Free Solutions domain as where I host or post that video content for the blind people?
And then you could use that for backlinking to the content just in case a sighted person happens across the blind person video.
Just link, just cross-link to both of them, right? So if you land on, Damashe.org at the moment and you see a video but you're blind, like, well, hey, if you want to check out the version of this with voiceover, description, click here and that takes you to Eyes Free Solutions to the exact same video. And then, like I said, do the same thing on Eyes Free Solutions. If a sighted person lands on that site and they don't want the voiceover, it's distracting or whatever, here, click here and get the version without voiceover.
And of course, without having to add a lot to your plate, you could just leverage IFTTT to add the links back to the articles for both of those respectively when you upload the video. But if anyone knows how to add the audio description track to a video because I know it can be done. I just don't know how to do it, and I haven't jumped down that rabbit hole yet on Google. Then definitely reach out, and let us know at Payon on Twitter or at Damashe.
Absolutely. So yeah, man. So we were talking the other day about WordPress development just in general, and I've kind of switched up my flow. So yeah, by the time this goes live, Damashe.org should be up, barring any major problems. It should be back up, rather moved over to a Linode and built using the methodology that I've sort of picked up. And started this Google searching actually because I was like, I really need to start using GitHub for my development, even though I don't currently classify myself as a WordPress developer. Consider myself to be more of a WordPress implementer, right? Like I can tinker with some code a little bit. I know what plugins are good for what situations, so I can implement your site. I can't go create a custom site from scratch yet. I don't call myself a WordPress developer, but I felt like, just about everything else I do is backed up in some sort of way, right? And I can easily redeploy, right? I got a clone of my hard drive, so if this internal drive dies, I can plug in the external drive, boot up, I'm ready to go. Everything is there. Need to figure out how to do that with WordPress, right? Because restoring a site from a backup, Mike, you've been there, it can be a pain in the ass.
Yes, it can. Listen to some of our earlier episodes. We'll link to them in the show notes over at yourownpay.com/DM28.
Yeah, it's good to have a backup of your site, but redeploying that backup is sometimes a problem. So I stumbled across just an article from a company that actually I use one of their free plugins that I might end up paying for, Delicious Brains, which is just an interesting name for a company.
Yeah. Now you have me intrigued now.
Yeah, I wonder if that's why they named it that, right? Like, I wonder if they get a lot of zombie people over there too, right? Like, hey, I wanted to, they talk about building WordPress sites and moving databases around. I don't care about that. But the two plugins that they make, and there are free versions of these, both available in the WordPress plugin directory, and then they have paid versions sold off their site. There's WP Migrate DB, and then the paid version is Migrate DB Pro. And the free version allows you to export your database from your website, but it does something super cool as well, which allows you to rewrite the URL. So it's supposed to be able to intelligently search your MySQL database and replace links. So if you were moving your site from, say Damashe.org to Damashe.com, which I decided not to do, you go in, and that way when you download the file, it's already got those rewritten URLs and the rewritten path where your site's going to be stored on the new server, which is cool. The paid version actually allows you to push and pull your database. So you just connect two sites together and say, hey, I'm going to, push this database from here to over there. Which is
take you out of the middle.
Yeah. So you don't have to deal with the whole importing the database to the new location. Yep. Which is nice. The other plugin they have is, what is it called? I'm going to get the name of it wrong. Essentially, it is a S3 offloader. So it will automatically offload your media files and different assets to a S3 bucket. So you upload using the normal WordPress uploader, and then it automatically takes that file, copies it over to a S3 bucket that you've chosen, and then optionally will delete the original file from your server, so you're not taking up that space on your server, which is, again, awesome, right?
Right.
Especially for people who I actually don't do a lot of uploading through the WordPress interface, though.
I do, but I upload to a different service. I guess it'd be classified as a CDN because I upload directly to Libsyn, which delivers all the podcasts, but I do that uploading through WordPress dashboard because you can with their plugin.
While looking at their site, because I was like, let me start reading their blog, because these guys develop WordPress sites. They make plugins. Let's find out, what kind of tips and tricks and information I can learn from them. I saw an article about developing your WordPress site using Git, and I was like, oh, okay, this might be a thing. Let's check this out. Let's get into it. It's like, yeah, I got a GitHub account, and I learned a couple of things starting out with this article, and I ended up way down a rabbit hole. But when I came out the other side, I think I came out for the best. It kind of shortened the version. First of all, just a piece of knowledge for anybody out there that was ignorant like I was. Git does not automatically, so GIT, Git, does not automatically equal GitHub. The reason that Git is synonymous with GitHub is, well, one, they got Git in the name of their product, too. Just very smart marketing on their part. A high-level overview of Git And if I get this wrong, if I get anything terribly wrong, like it's just ass backwards, tweet at me. If I get some little minor details wrong, it's okay, because I'm going to drop a whole bunch of links into the show notes for people to actually go read up on this, right? So don't tweet at me because I said, I don't know, version control, and you think of it as something else, right? Let's not go down that hole.
Do your own due diligent research before bitching.
Yeah. So Git basically is a version control system, and I've explained it to a couple of people this way. You think about what you have with Mac OS now, where you start working on a file in TextEdit or Byword, just about all of the document editing apps on the Mac, and they're constantly saving versions of that app in the background, right? So you can go back and look at a previous version. So you make a few changes, you're like, crap, I forgot what I deleted out of there. I messed it up. Let me go back. Okay, that's version control, basically, because it's keeping a copy of each version of the file as you update it. That's what Git does, but Git does this for a massive amount of files. It can be one file, it can be 1,000 files. So, consider the WordPress core is keeping track of all the changes that are made in WordPress. Git also brings in, sort of the track changes thing that you get with Microsoft Office. I believe this is also available in my Google Docs. There we go.
Yeah.
So you can see who made changes to what, right? So if you're collaborating with somebody on a project using Git, you can see that, Michael made a change to this file on this date at this time, and you write commit messages. So you explain what you did before you commit. There's a lot of terminology to get into. Like I said, I'm going to drop some links into some articles that help me first get a good grasp on Git and what all the different terms meant, so that I was using them correctly. And then two, sort of explain why I would want to use this with WordPress. In the long term, what I actually came out to is going to this site at roots.io. Me and Mike have talked before about there's a lot of cool shit at .io domains for some reason. I have no idea why, but .io, there's a lot of cool stuff. Yeah. I think there's even a cool shit.io website that I found. But if I can find that again, I'll definitely put it in the show notes. But Roots has taken this, they've basically borrowed, I guess is a good way to put it, from other development platforms that are not WordPress. So other ways of developing applications, because at its core, at its base, WordPress is an app. So you're working on an app.
So, internet app.
Yep. Just like Twitter is an app. The web app is a Twitter is an app, right? So, I mean, it's just a web app. But what they've done basically, they've taken a lot of practices from other good development strategies and done their best to implement those in WordPress development. Definitely going to drop some links into some posts that explain their theory, because I don't want to spend a whole lot of time trying to explain their theory. But here's essentially the overall high level view of their theory. You need to develop your site locally. So when you're building a site or you're making changes to your site, do it in a local development environment first. Make sure it works, then push it to a staging environment, which is optional. Some people don't choose to take that extra step of a staging site. And then from there, you can push it to your production site, which is your live site. That's where your people are going. That's where people are visiting. That's where people are spending their money with you, if that's what you're doing with your website. That particular premise with developing for WordPress is not really anything new. The implementation that they have, though, is using a virtual machine to host the exact, so that your website, your local development environment, 100% or as close as possible matches what the production environment is going to be like. Anybody that has used MAP or anything like that in the past, you got one environment on Mac OS, but when you push out to a server, or you upload that site to a server, that server is first of all, it's not Mac OS.
Unless you specifically find Mac hosting. Most of the hosting that you're going to find from your shared hosting or from cloud hosting, reference one of those previous episodes, it's going to be Linux.
And they have developed, they'll put together a nice little package that they call Trellis. And Trellis allows you to basically, using a system of a virtual machine, typically hosted with Virtualbox, which I was a little wary about at first, because I've heard that Virtualbox wasn't accessible. I still actually don't know if it's accessible, right? Because I never actually interact with the graphical user interface of the GUI. I do everything from the command line, just as if I was, SSHing into my Linode and running commands. So I still don't know if Virtualbox is accessible or not.
Okay, because I I went down the rabbit hole of, well, I could do this in VirtualBox, but I don't know if it's accessible, so maybe I should look up and see if I can do this in VMware. And then I'm like, well, I'll just wait until Damashe and I talk about it, because he's going to be doing something, and maybe VirtualBox is accessible. So you don't know still.
I still don't know. One thing that's introduced in using the trellis way of developing is, or the roots method using trellis, is, again, not anything new to a lot of, most developers out there that are doing stuff outside of WordPress, is the concept of using variable files. So instead of committing, and because you're using GitHub, right? First of all, you're using GitHub to commit your changes and all this stuff. You don't want to push your website up to Git, even if it's a private repository with passwords and etc. Stored in your config.php file, your wp-config.php file, which is generally where most of that stuff lives at, right? Your license keys for plugins and themes, your passwords for this, that, and the other, all lives in that file. Well, WordPress does not work without that file, so you have to have that file. What they introduce here is the concept of using variables in your environment. So you use a variable file, and then they've basically, the PHP file, the config.php file, goes and looks in the right place to get the information that it needs. So for your database password, or for your root database user password, or your admin password to get into the back end of your website. But that env file is never committed to your Git repository. So as you're switching, and it also allows you to be a little bit more lax with your passwords or whatever in your local environment versus what you do on your production server.
And it gives you one place to have to change all your passwords.
Right. And that's the key thing, right? It also uses a PHP package manager to install WordPress and any plugins that are, publicly available or themes that are publicly available in the WordPress repository there. So again, if you've ever done anything with Ruby or Node, they got package managers. Composer is a package manager for PHP. So technically, when you're committing your database, all you're committing is, and all you have is a lot of files that say, hey, go here to get this thing when I run this command, right? So you run composer install, and there's a lock, what they call a composer.json file that holds all the requirements for your environment, right? So one of those requirements is WordPress. Download that, puts it in the correct folder. Any plugins that you add, are stored there. So require the ConvertKit plugin, for example. So regardless of where you deploy this, whether you do it on your local machine, whether you're doing it on a staging environment, whether you're doing it on your production site, the first time you get ready to launch that site, you run composer install, boom, it goes out, pulls down all the stuff that you need to install, looks at your environment variable file and says, okay, I need to configure the database with this password. The database name is going to be this, blah, 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 so on. There you go. You have the exact same, there's your environment. Now, if I was to invite Mike to my repo and say, hey, Mike, I want you to collab with me on this. Mike goes in, Mike clones the repo, and Mike can do whatever he wants to do locally with his passwords and his environment variable file. But if I say, Mike, hey, go check out this page at damashe.org/checkout and tell me if you're seeing the same thing I'm seeing, he should see the exact same thing I'm seeing, because we're both using the exact same environment. Because the machine itself is being hosted as a virtual Linux box that is going to exactly match the configuration of what you're going to get on the Linode server when it goes up.
And that's the way to think of the virtual Linux box, is having your own local cloud server on your computer. So you're deploying your own Linode on your Mac, so you can do all the testing right there, right?
Right.
So let me ask you this quick question. Do you have a file on your computer right now that everything for your WordPress environment is held in, and you could send it to me, and if I installed VirtualBox, I could be seeing the same thing you're running? Or how would that work if you wanted to share it with someone?
So you would install all the requirements, and I would say, Mike, just go type in, git clone and the URL, and you can pull down my site. Actually, I think I would have to invite you to that repo, because it's actually private. It's not a public repo. So yeah, I would have to add you, but that's not a problem. And then, Mike, just go hit this and then download. It'll download everything that's currently in the repo, the most current version. And then you could run Vagrant up from inside the trellis folder, and you're good to go. You would see everything that I'm seeing right now, which is another thing that sort of attracted this to me, right? Because I'm like, okay, first of all, if I ever collaborate with somebody on a WordPress site, this is super easy, right? To get them where I'm at right now. Like all they got to do is basically go fill in the correct environment variables.
Yeah.
And we're done. Right. No, hey, install this app and then do this. And then, fix your settings just like this. No, you don't need to install that package, but no, we got
wrong version.
That. Yeah, you got the wrong version of PHP. No,
Apache.
So that's how you would get it. Now, there's one thing that I sort of neglected to mention. And again, like I said, we're going to link to a lot of stuff in the show notes. So if you really want to get into how this stuff works, you can. There's one thing I forgot to mention. Anybody that has dealt with servers for a lot of years, and you have done stuff on servers for any length of time, you're probably familiar with the concept of scripts and running a bunch of scripts and building a script that does a bunch of things for you all at one time. There are things out there to make that work. I did not ever use Chef, but I read a book about it. That helps. But Ansible is sort of the latest, automation, server automation tool out there. That's what I'll call it. That's how I think of it, as a server automation tool. And it's built around the concept of playbooks. And you essentially tell it what you want it to do based on these environment variables, based on, if this fails, then do this. If this works, then continue to the next step. So all Trellis is really doing is kicking off a bunch of Ansible playbooks that go out and build your server. So essentially the reason like I said, I started down this rabbit hole, but when I came out the other side, I felt good, right? Because I'm like, one, I can develop in a local environment. I'm not sprinkling a whole bunch of crap all over my machine. I can easily collaborate with somebody else and get them up and running with this fairly quickly. So if me and Mike want to, collaborate on a project with a WordPress site, we could do this, right? I mean, Mike have to, get to where I am with Git, which really ain't all that far. So he'd be all right.
I'm working my way there. I sent you some articles. We'll link to them in the show notes.
Absolutely. And we could do this, and we could do this relatively, like, none of the things that I have mentioned right now cost you any money. The only thing that's going to cost you money is where you host your website at. And it's going to have to be, if you're going to use their trellis build solution, you're going to have basically a VPS, or you're going to have a dedicated server, right? You cannot do it on shared hosting simply because you can't install some of the stuff that you would need to install on your shared hosting server.
VPSs are typically cheaper than shared hosting nowadays.
Yeah, exactly, right? $5 for a Linode, man, and you're off and running, or $5 for DigitalOcean if you like them better. We did a conversation. We got a show about Linode and VPSs in general, so we'll link to that in the show notes. You can hear us kind of geek out on it a little bit, because it is fun, and it is so amazing considering, what servers used to cost you to have basically a dedicated box. Now, there is one other solution, and Mike asked me about this yesterday. Mike asked, was I using the WordPress Beginner? And we're going to link to those guys. It's a great website. If you're starting to learn. Yeah, love those guys over there. If I was using their method for building a staging site, and I was like, I don't know, because I've never heard of what their suggestions are. So let me go and read this article, and then I'll tell you. And my answer to Mike was kind of, sort of, because there's also another project that the folks over at Roots have called Bedrock, and that's basically just the foundation for a WordPress site. So it's a part of the overall Trellis build, but take out all of the Ansible Vagrant stuff, and you're left with what they have built and what they consider to be the best practices for a WordPress site. So the way that Bedrock works is your typical WordPress install. Well, it's not your typical WordPress install, but it's WordPress. It's not anything complicated. You're still using Composer to manage your PHP stuff. So you're still using Composer to install WordPress, to install plugins, to install themes. If you have any custom plugins or paid themes, you have to figure out how to get those in there. Generally, just download them and put them in the appropriate folder. So if it's a theme, put it in the theme folder, and it'll work. But they changed sort of the file structure of the WordPress file structure. So you start out with your site folder. That's just going to be site. That's your folder that's going to contain all of your WordPress stuff. Inside of that folder, you're going to have your Composer file that tells Composer all the stuff that you need to install, all the stuff that's required. So outside of WordPress, your plugins, etc. You're going to have, and there's some other files in there. Again, I'm going to link to some stuff that kind of explain all the different pieces, but the main pieces are your Composer files that tell Composer what to install what you need for WordPress. You have a web folder, which contains the stuff that we generally are used to seeing inside of a it's a web folder. I'm sorry, I had to go look. So a web folder that contains all of the actual WordPress files that we're used to seeing. So inside that folder, you have an app folder that contains your themes, your plugins, and your uploads. You have a WP folder that actually contains the WordPress core files, or that's where they'll get installed when you run Composer install. And then you have your WP config.php file there. That doesn't do anything because all it does is tell WordPress where to go get the actual information that it needs to run itself, right? There's actually not any unseeable or, private information held in that file like it generally is. So that's where all the WordPress stuff lives, is inside this web folder. Also, in your main site folder, you have a config folder, and this holds all of the files where you're going to actually store the information. So, where your PHP commands live, where all that stuff lives at that you would normally see in the wp-config.php file. And the nice thing about this structure is that, one, the only folder that's actually publicly available on the web, so the only folder that people can get to by visiting your website or trying to dig into your server, is going to be that web folder. So all of your private information, passwords, license keys, etc., are stored in a config folder that is not publicly available. It does not have permission to be, nobody has permission to read this folder outside of somebody that's logged into your server. They're logged into your server, you got much bigger problems. So this Bedrock structure for a website, this can actually be deployed on a shared host. You have several different options for getting it there. My current option right now, or what I'm going to do when I actually deploy the site that I've been working on locally that has to go up on a shared host, I'm going to initially try just copying the files over there and see what happens, right? If it breaks something, then okay, I know that's not the way to go with that. So I'll report back, follow up, post on the website or something about that. We'll either talk about it again later on in another episode, or I'll write out, what happened over on Damashe.org, and Michael we'll link back to it and all that stuff. Yeah. So you'll find out what happens, if that broke it or if it worked. So that's kind of been my experiment with trying to become using better practices when developing for WordPress. And again, I'm still learning my way through this process.
And that's important to realize for anyone, is all of this is a learning process.
Right.
We'll talk about it in the next episode, about what I've learned throughout producing my WordPress course, because as I've realized, I obviously don't know everything about WordPress. Neither does Damashe, and you probably don't either listening to this. So realize that if you're testing stuff out and you have a method or a methodology to recovering from any mistakes that you end up running into or anything that you break, then you can test things out and see what works for you and then commit them to the web. And that's why I wanted to pick Damashe's brain about this today. So I appreciate it.
Thanks, guys, for listening in. Hopefully you found some valuable information, or you're just fascinated to come along on this journey. As we mentioned, we'll be reporting back about what we find out. And until then,
you've been listening to Your Own Pay Podcast. If you've enjoyed today's episode, visit yourownpay.com/cast for exclusive content and to contact us today. We're eager to hear your thoughts to Your Own Pay Podcast. If you've enjoyed today's episode, visit yourownpay.com/cast for exclusive content and to contact us today. We're eager to hear your thoughts and about how you're making this podcast your own. Thanks for listening. We'll be back soon. The Your Own Pay Podcast, yourownpay.com.